Terrific, and welcome everyone to our presentation. Thank you for the opportunity to share information and experiences with you that I really hope you will find beneficial regardless of the stage that you're at. Perhaps you are new to hiring and looking to move forward and understand what's required, or you're wanting to update your own practices that you have had in place to make sure that they're compliant and that you're meeting some of the new requirements and expectations, and or you are growing and you are again looking to create a whole new process and understand and glean maybe some information that may be new to add to what you already have in existence. So terrific. Thank you very much. And the topics today will include HR requirements and compliance overview, ESA employer responsibilities, employee termination do's and don'ts, key components to include in an employment agreement, orientation and onboarding checkpoints, and workplace HR policy essentials. You'll find as we move through the presentation that typically my style is to put key points together. I have added a little extra to each slide than I normally would in text, just so that if the slides end up being available to go out, which I'm fine with, and I'm sure the CDC is also fine with, so that's been great to work with, that if they go to you, you have a little bit more key points to note, which may go with the notes that you're taking, and that you'll be able to reference those back. So here's our whys. So why we do this is that we have found ourselves in a position where so much is needed behind the scenes for businesses. I had a dream of becoming a business owner because I'm third generation entrepreneur, and I just didn't know really what I wanted to do. I knew I had a lot of interests. However, where I would really shine was in process, organization, putting things together, work ethic, all of these different areas that I found were important, and also the fact finding and follow through as to what to do if we didn't have anything or guideline to follow. So that's how the Next Gen Hub and Safety Training and Consulting really was formed. Next Gen Hub was the first one to come, which dealt with what we all know, accounting. And what comes with that? HR. And then what comes and adds to that? Safety. And that's where they all tie together. So this is what we do. And it's been a journey of more than 18 years. And as we explore and learn, and of course, adapt to the ongoing changes of our workforce, expectations of employers, and also the expectations of employees, including how we get around and how we work with due diligence and make our workplace a place that we also can continue to enjoy, even though there are a lot of regulations. I'll explain a lot as I go as to why the regulations are there, which sometimes really helps us become more comfortable with them when we understand the whys behind it. So our whys is that we like care and we really like to help people be in a good place, be proactive, and support them behind the scenes. One of the big parts that's really important with respect to human resources is really about mitigating your risk and liability as an employer. So many of us want to be great leaders, and there's quite a movement forward that we've actually been part of and also continuing to educate ourselves on over the last few years, which is being great leaders, being great bosses. Although I don't like to use that term with my team, I feel it's lead. Sometimes I'm leading, sometimes they are. But as a leader, it's really, really important that we plan, we prepare, and we're being proactive in the most informative way that we can, and also for what the means with which we have and know. And outsourcing can be really helpful. We do outsource what we don't know or have to develop our business as well. And so we also then are very collaborative and also follow what we actually say, which is if we don't know, we seek to find out. So at the end of this, I do have my direct line and email. So if you have a question, I'm more than happy to do my best to answer that for you individually. So one of the things about mitigating risk and liability is be informed, then be clear and be specific. Employees are looking for culture, environment, some clarity, fun, and happiness in their role, inclusivity and fair opportunity, safety and security, and flexibility where possible. this is what they're looking for today. And boy, aren't we as well? We're looking for all of these things too, which if we put things together, the whole idea is that we have a good collaborative mutual arrangement together and a happy work environment. And that's not to say that there will never be issues, but what it does say is by going through some of the things that we'll talk about today, it is going to happen less often. And when it does happen, you'll know what to do to go through the process. So one thing that's important when you're looking to mitigate risk is be welcoming and friendly with your team, yet be mindful as a leader that not everyone can work with family or friends. And it's difficult when when difficult decisions have to be made, it can be very challenging. I'm not to say that family and friends cannot work together because I've grown up in an entrepreneurial environment some time ago as a young person growing up, where there weren't written policies and procedures and so on. It was an expectation that was trained, understood through work ethic, through work, all of these different parts. But as we grow and develop, we are all learning. And one of the most important things, as I always say, is that you can replace sometimes a team member. It can be challenging, not that you want to, but to do that for family or friends or maybe a partner in your business is not so easy, and there's a lot more stress that comes with it. So prepare yourself, whether they're family, friends, whether they're people that you've hired that are not, they're new to you and they're not family or friends. Please look at all aspects of your hiring and recruiting of team members in the same way and go through the same process. One of the processes that's often talked about, and I'm sure you've heard about, is plan, do, check, act. And repeat that. In your business, whatever that is, you're going to be doing some of that. HR planning is just like if you have a restaurant and you're planning menus and you're ordering food. If you are a daycare, you're looking at making sure you meet requirements, planning for the children, planning for the parents, having your agreements and so on. If you're in construction, you're doing the same thing. You're planning, you're looking at the doing part of it, you're checking, you're acting, and then you're repeating that process. And again, the repetition time is dependent on the business, but it's important to relook at that in a timely manner. And also, as you'll see coming forward, there's certain things that we need to do on an annual basis as far as requirements. So what's really important, again, about saving our relationships and enjoying being an employer and having HR in play is that employment agreements, defining roles, following compliance, policies, procedures, and so on really, really help with this. Compliance and governing bodies for employers include Employment Standards Act, so ESA, your CRA and payroll requirements, human rights and common law, AODA for accessibility standards, and specific industry standards and licensing. So I'll use an example of that, an electrician as an example, or accreditation that's required for someone to obviously be a lawyer or to provide services, or other accreditation in their role that's required, or licensing. That's what I'm meaning by specific standards. So those are all of those particular areas. Under the ESA, again, these don't fall under ESA, they're in addition to the Employment Standards Act. Workplace Safety and Insurance Board, or WSIB, Ministry of Labor, Immigration and Training Skills Development, which was formerly MOL. What happened is that they amalgamated part of the different departments in the Ministry of Labor, which skills and development were added, which is awesome. It should be there. And then, of course, with more immigration and foreign workers, it all became part of the tie to HR and safety. And then Occupational Health and Safety Act, which is our green book. We all as employers, even if you have one employee, have some regulations to follow, and HR that is really important to look at, address, and put in place. So really, really important. Again, the more employees, the more you have in play, the more risk of your workplace, the more you have in play, because it's an increased risk or increased liability. So solid recruiting includes a few different areas. So we used to do a lot of recruiting until, as I'm sure many of you have found, it's really difficult, or has been really difficult, to recruit and find the right mutual fit employees for your team. Some of it is due to lack of candidates. Some of it is due to those that that are wanting to be employed but haven't maybe had experience, or maybe things aren't common to them as far as what's expected as a worker or a team member in the workplace. There's a variety of reasons. I can say that this shift is changing and that there are more candidates that are applying for roles, and which is great. So we have more candidates as an employer to review, but also it's a great opportunity for individuals to be able to move through their career and perhaps make changes that are important to them. So one of the pieces that's really important when you're looking at recruiting is be prepared and include feedback from your direct reports. So direct reports, if you're not familiar with that term, is the person that, for instance, if I was a team member, I would be directly reporting to. So my supervisor could be my supervisor. It could be a direct report like a lead hand, or it could be a shift leader. And then from there, it could be supervisor and so on. Sometimes in small businesses, you are all of it as an employer. You're the direct report, you're the supervisor, you're the project planner, you are the employer, all of those things. When companies are larger, they have different people in the different roles because it's too overwhelming to keep on top of that. And then they grow to a position where they need those resources in hand. So one of the things is to really seek information from the person that the new recruit or the individual is going to be directly reporting to. They have great information. They're the ones doing the job all the time. If that's you, list out all of the duties that you do in a day, in a week, in a month, and you'll find that there's a lot of little points that become not so little when some of those are missed in your processes within your business, and it can affect your bottom line. It can affect many things, including stress, HR issues with broken relationships, and so on. So it really affects a lot. So really important to glean the information develop from yourself, and or glean the information from other direct reports that this new recruit is going to be directly reporting to, and or other ones involved in the business in that type of role. Communicate your recruiting practices to each candidate. Make sure that they are aware either prior to in your process, maybe it's in your job ad, maybe it's something that you do when you actually meet the candidate in person. Many recruiting practices now include a virtual meeting to start off with before that we have any kind of in-person meeting. And again, people are coming from all parts of the world. People are coming from different areas, so it's not always possible to meet in person. However, whenever it is possible, we recommend that it's really important to have that one-on-one follow-up after a virtual meeting or perhaps a call. It's nothing like in person to be able to really assess if this relationship may move forward as an employer-employee. Make sure everything is fair and inclusive and in the opportunities for all candidates that may be applying. Ensure that your non-negotiables, and we'll speak more to this in a moment, skills and experience is met. Ask appropriate and important questions. Do not skip important steps, including the skill tests. So if you have specific skill tests that are required, don't skip them. We have made this mistake ourselves sometimes by thinking, okay, this seems great, and they seem like everything's going to be just fine by use some of your research. But then when you actually get into the role, the candidate said that they knew maybe a bit more than they did, or maybe they really did think that their skill set was amazing, but for what your needs are, what our needs are, it wasn't quite to standard, and that does happen. So just really important to do that, follow through no matter what. Also follow through with the reference checking, make the calls, take the time to do it, and acquire certifications and security checks. So even though we say we need them, I find that many employers do not actually follow through with this step. What happens is they start to check up and follow through when they start to have issues or concerns. And at that point, it becomes an issue to resolve. And again, you've not followed through accordingly to what you've said that you would as far as your practices. Communicate important information to candidates, what you're looking for, information, how you may align, that type of thing, and document and follow up with those candidates that were interviewed. Again, in time gone by, you may have so many candidates, there's no way you could possibly follow up with them. Then note that, say only count in your ad, or when you actually have conversation, that not everyone or will be followed through with at the end, and or only you'll be contacting the successful candidate. At least let people know. It's very important to communicate that and be respectful of their time, as they should be respectful of your time in the recruiting process. This is poster. I apologize, just by the shape of it, to put it into the slide is important, but it does deal with health and safety, and prevention starts here, which deals with rights, roles, and responsibilities. All you need to do is click on, basically is go to Ministry of Labor, MLITSD, and they will actually have an area where you'll be able to download this poster. The other poster that's really important to have available is your ESA poster. There have been changes to this. It used to be that you had to post it in your workplace. Now there are changes that say you just need to provide it to your employees upon hire, so that they are aware of where to go to find information about their rights, responsibilities, and what you're obligated to do as an employer. And that all becomes part of this place. And it also attends to the Ministry of Labor as well. So they all tie in together, even though they're separate agencies and they're separate compliance bodies. HR and safety does tie together, and it crosses over more than we would think. And this is something that we find often happens. It makes sense, I'm sure, when we go through this, or hopefully it'll help make more sense. So roles and responsibilities like job descriptions and so on are extremely important, and making sure that they're clear. That the direct reports, remember what the job description in hiring someone new, the direct report or supervisor's job description might change as well because of their role and what they need to do. Compliance, competency of the individual, skills, compliance, communication skills, those job descriptions that need adjustment, and fresh consideration. One of the things to look at in a leader is, do they lead by example? And those are really important things when you're looking at roles and responsibilities for hiring somebody, and then who they're going to report to. For example, if you are chief cook and bottle washer, as we have said, that is great, but do you know how to lead by example? And if not, then seek the questions, find out what was required by that, and make sure that you do that, so you're mentoring and setting a great example for your team moving forward. Performance review options, so making sure that in performance reviews, you're going to be addressing safety and HR. You're going to be addressing what the job description and requirements are. Are they meeting the employment agreement that you have in place? And are these also part of the safety compliance component that's required for safe work practices? Communication and documentation is really important. And one that's often missed is the positive feedback. Really important to provide positive feedback for things that are going right. Acknowledging individuals. It's so important to hear that feedback, because when you're a new employee and are going through a role change maybe, or just been within a company for a long time, it's really great to hear that positive feedback. So take the time to do that, really important. If there are any corrections that are required, make sure that those are acted on as quick as possible. So a general correction may be a meeting just with a team member that is not performing well, or that maybe you're not feeling that their skills are quite where they should be. Have a meeting, discuss it, show them, offer training, do what you can that's reasonable to you. And that means that you have the opportunity, take that time, pair them with someone, or spend some time with them to ensure that they understand and that they have the opportunity to make the correction. When it comes to discipline, it's really important to look at what are the consequences with respect to discipline. So sometimes what happens in policies and procedures and specific to HR, we speak about discipline. This is what's going to happen, especially with respect to progressive discipline, which means basically the three checks: the verbal, the written, and then your third written or termination at that juncture. We need to talk about what the consequences are for each step and what's inside a termination. Again, some of these points are coming forward as we move through it, but important for you to start thinking about these things as we move through our discussion today. Also, we wanted to speak to coming back to work and returning to work and other specific areas that were really important to think about in your planning to hire and being in a good position as an employer to mitigate risk and liability, provide the resources, the support, and the information for your team for a mutually successful employment and employer-employee relationship. One of the key, another area which is really important to help with hiring and confidence is planning to recruit and hiring the right mutual fit. It's not only important that you're happy and that it's going to be good for you, meaning that you're going to really alleviate work if you're a service. It's going to help you free you up to do other things that you want to, such as maybe building the business or having more time and freedom. It may mean that you are looking at that individual to take a portion of the workload from another individual to free them up to help you in your specific area. So it's really important to find that right mutual fit. We do look at, as far as our company, this is not a mandatory requirement, but we do look at 2 assessments that really help us determine if it's going to be the right person. And again, it will not always be 100%, but what we're looking to do is try and get as close to 100% and help you with that by the information provided today. So when you're looking to plan, again, you want to look at timing. So looking at your internal needs, are you ready to hire the first person or the next person to add to your team? And some things that are often not thought about is not only is doing your best to try and help some of your overwhelm, because that's usually the first thing. I'm so overwhelmed, I need to hire someone. Then the next thing that we don't always think about is what about the financial investment and considerations? So there are a couple key components that we suggest are really, really important when you're recruiting. One is the timing of it. Yes, you're overwhelmed. Are there ways that you can streamline your processes or add technology to your process that may help with that? Maybe you really think you need to hire, but maybe those are things that you need to do first before you're ready to hire. And are you ready to commit to the financial aspect for that individual that you're hiring? Which means looking at your bottom line, your numbers, the comparisons. So for instance, what your income or your gross revenue is with your expenses and what it means to have an employee, whether that's casual, part-time, or full-time. There's still needs that it's really important to look at. You don't want to hire someone and then find down the road that, oh, that's great, but now I am not able to continue hiring them because I don't have the financial means. And this, again, does not mean that there's not challenges or things that happen that you did not count on or that you were not prepared for, like anyone. But this is just to go through and think about these things before you make that commitment and that next stage. Because again, as a business owner, it adds a lot of stress. I know myself included that all of my team members have families. And so it's really important for me that when we go to hire, that we know that we are going to be able to support and sustain that person as long as it mutually works out, because we care about them and we don't want to see that be a challenge. And that would be something for me. Everyone has different stresses, but that would be a stress for me. It's important for me to provide a really good working environment because I have high expectations of myself and our clients have high expectations of ourselves, of us as a team, that we really want to deliver on. So again, no one's perfect, but those are really key important areas. And I'm sure regardless of the business that you're in as you attend today or maybe getting into or growing, same thing. It's our reputation, it's our name, it's your reputation, it's your name, and those things that are really, really important in entrepreneurial businesses right through to larger organizations. So once we have the timing and we know, okay, we're ready to hire, then we need to be ready. So what's important is communication considerations. So making sure that you have all the information that you'll need to communicate to the team members and the new team member coming into your employ, which includes posters, internal readiness, and the resources to provide the training, to provide the time that's required to onboard a new employee. And internal readiness, that means policies, procedures, the structure of things that we, again, are going to talk about today. Preparation, job descriptions, be very clear about job descriptions. Sometimes our job descriptions as employers are here today and tomorrow they're on to something else. And it's not to say that someone is doing it wrong. It just means that when we take the time to outline the job description that's required, that's going to help us the most, that's going to benefit the employee the most so that they're happy, they have good mutual set, and that the business is going to profit from as well at the same time. Again, that benefits, that's sustainability for those relationships and helps with our growth and development. When we look at all of that, some of the most important internal readiness is what we've mentioned here, as well as policies, procedures, readiness if something does happen. What do we do as we grow? So these are all things that, again, I'm sure a lot of you will have in your business plans or certainly considering or hopefully will consider in the future. Further preparation with respect to the job description, again, outlining everything, as I mentioned earlier, about what you do if it's your first hire. Reviewing job descriptions if you have in place. Maybe it was that job description was developed 3 years ago. The majority of it will likely be okay, and it will still be relevant, but there will be some that will need to be updated. And again, if your job description for a new recruit is going to affect anyone else, direct reports, supervisors, others, leaders, then you'll need to just double check their job descriptions as well to make sure that that information gets into their job descriptions so that they know what they're accountable for. And it gives them a clarity on what is expected. And we'll speak again a bit more about competency and choosing leaders to manage and monitor people that you're recruiting and on an HR level. So employment agreements, extremely important. It used to be that these were done very occasionally. Our experience is that all companies that we work with either have or are going through the process or are asking for employment agreements. And that is really important information because it, again, mitigates risk and liability for the employer. It provides opportunity for the employee to know what we expect and also what is expected but from the employer under employment standards, regulations, and so on. So again, it's really, really important information that is noted in the employment agreement that really supports and helps you as an employer. Determining the direct reports again, and then performance review forms and scheduling. So preparation, when you're looking at developing your job description, that's the time to as well develop your performance review form. Really important because that way you're measuring the right things. You're not going to run out of time because I know many people probably have experienced that it doesn't take very long for the probation period, and then all of a sudden you have a performance review to come up, or you skip it because you don't have time. And it's really important for a variety of reasons to make sure that you do follow through with the review. Employees like the feedback. You're giving them one-on-one attention, which we don't always have on a day-to-day basis. So it's important for that. They do want to know what's working well. And if there are improvements, then you have the opportunity to review that with them. And making sure that when it comes to performance reviews, again, specific to probationary reviews, that you don't wait to the last minute. So the day before or even the week before, try and get that in maybe 2 weeks prior to the end at the latest, before the probation period ends. So that if you do need to make a decision or something comes up in that meeting that might change your mind to continue employment, you have that option rather than running right through the end. So that's important. And it's also more fair for the employee to know where they stand. Again, don't wait to the performance review to address issues. This is a separate review. If there are issues, deal with them when they come up. And but as far as an ongoing importance of a good practice is to make sure that you conduct the performance reviews and you're ready. Training, so you'll have paperwork and hands-on. So that paperwork may be It's still digital. I'm just calling it paperwork that's required. So training, such as due diligence, checkoffs and sign-offs. Due diligence is really, really important as an employer, and it is a mutually important between the employer and the employee relationship. And here's how. So as an employer, we're required to provide and pay for what's required for safety training, for becoming a really good employer, for meeting compliance and guidelines. And then when we teach that and provide that to the employee, then they are accountable for following along. And so it's a really good mutual practice. We never do anything when it comes to training of any sort, human resources or safety, that is not done through a due diligence program. It's very, very important. And it really puts us in a place as employers to be ready and accountable. And it puts our employees in a great place that they really understand. And it gives them a chance to say, I don't feel comfortable in training. I need more before signing off. And it gives them an opportunity to really be clear about what our employer expects or what regulations our industry expect. So that's really important. The hands-on portion of onboarding is always done by the direct report, typically the supervisor, which may be the owner as well, or the employer as well. And it may be by somebody else that has been delegated as a lead or a support team member to do that on behalf of a supervisor. So the direct report is who that employee is actually going to directly report to. It may also be directly to a supervisor. It'll be different in different employment setups and titles that you have from within your organization. But it is really, really important to look at the paperwork side, the theory of training, the information, and then on the other side, the hands-on training, the doing, the actual work of it. So that's really important throughout your orientation and onboarding process. Communication, so important, and follow-ups. So make sure that you have periodic assessments, check-ins, and feedback, always important. Performance reviews, again, we spoke to the probationary, and then typically annual reviews are required. So again, there's no law to say that you have to do that. It's just a really good, important practice to have annual reviews. And we always note to say that all reviews don't mean an increase. It's a chance for feedback. Do employees sometimes expect that? Yes, unless you're not clear about that. To say that we have performance reviews, they're probationary, then we may do an annual, but we wouldn't be looking at salary review till maybe 18 months or 2 years. These are clarity points that need to be put into the employment agreement. Okay. So one of the points that's really important on human resources is a duty to accommodate. And the reason I'm addressing this earlier is that it's really, really important to understand when people are away from work. We're going to get into a little bit further, more of the details around what's important to have in play, and including what's important to have and address in an employment agreement. But the duty to accommodate is really important to understand when you are looking at HR and when you are a new employer or an employer who's continuing to hire as you're growing and developing. So there's a couple of areas. So when it comes to the WSIB, which is Workplace Safety Insurance Board, it's always returning to work from an injury or illness. And that is a whole process that can be found online. And I can make sure that I do provide the links to Celeste so that she's able to share those, or you can ask us directly, whichever you're more comfortable with. You'll be able to download how that works. And it becomes an area where there's forms that are completed for this, and the duty to accommodate through WSIB is part of what's called a functional abilities form, where it'll be outlined by their healthcare provider, whether that's physio, a doctor, a specialist, what the individual employee is able to do to continue working, to become to be healed back to their original state prior to injury. That's the goal. One of the things you want to avoid as an employer, if you possibly can, is lost time claims. Reporting injuries through the proper forms and process growing and learning, all those things are very, very positive, very, very positive with WSIB. It's not going to affect your actual rate. It's when you have lost time claims, and that means that you're not able to accommodate. Sometimes employers are not willing to accommodate, which is something that is a requirement. It's important to work together with your employee and to make sure that you are able to accommodate them, again, returning to work. The other part that we use as a term to try and separate them is when people are on a personal leave, and we call it coming back to work, because the rules on the opportunities to ask specific questions or acquire other information is quite a bit different actually than what WSIB allows us to do or permits us to do, and or for the employee and what they have to do back for us. So it is different. And so this would be times when someone would be off on a personal leave, such as they've had a surgery for their shoulder, they've had a personal injury at home, and they have a note to be off work. And this means that they would be typically on a leave, they would be going on EI. That's the difference. The other one would be they're in a WSIB claim for workplace injury. So for personal leaves, there are areas as well that are protected. Job protective leaves are when people go on a sick or stress leave, and another one is for maternity or paternity. Those jobs, with the doctor's note that comes in, we would provide as HR, we would make sure that we provide all of the proper documentation through a record of employment, just like the person would be going off on any other type of leave or leaving employment. So that's done. The person applies for EI, and then their job is protected. It means that when they're ready to come back, then we have to make sure as an employer that we have the role there for them. So that's really important. Again, for mat leaves, paternity leaves, for sick leaves or stress leaves. Those types of health leaves are areas that we need to protect. So what's important again about that, again, that's all HR is important, as you're hearing me say frequently, is that being organized and having everything in play and understanding the components is important in making sure that you are ready, because the bottom line is typically you have an employee because you have work that needs to be done to support the business, to grow, to serve your clients or customers. So again, it becomes an important gap that needs to be prepared for if it ever happens down the line. And one of the best things that to encourage is honesty. Always be honest and upfront and expect it back from your team members, because that will help with planning. So rather than someone being afraid to say, that they are going to be going off on maternity leave, provide opportunity encourage them to tell you early on so that you are able to prepare together, and that you're maybe able to have some support and help with a replacement for that person during that period in time. So again, very, very important for honesty, open lines of communication on a mutual level. So one of the components about coming back to work that's important is that the employer could request a doctor's note or physician's note, which would confirm that the employee can come back to work for their regular duties. If the employee is not able to come back to regular duties and you cannot accommodate them, then they would stay on EI until they're ready to come back to work to full duties, and or where you can accommodate them. Always do your best to try and accommodate where possible. Keep good relations with your team members. Again, sometimes it's just not possible and you just don't have the space or the work. So there's a process to go through for that, but do your best to accommodate, because keeping and maintaining really good, solid relationships and open, honest relationships with your employees is invaluable. And it's really important because when you work together, it really makes the workplace and just overall experience and day-to-day amazing. And so again, doing your best and saying it doesn't always work, but do your best. Again, and we have found that when you are open and honest and you have good communication and you have really good HR practices set up in your business, for the majority of the time, you have really good outcome for both. When it comes to WSIB and the return to work, so focus on number 4 here. So this is your WSIB poster. So the posters that we're showing and just noting so you can have a visual view of them. Again, we'll send the link. These are the posters that are mandatory required in every workplace when you hire someone. Number 4 is work together. So this poster is new, but this is where we focus on the return to work. Duty to accommodate is we work with you and your employer to help you recover and return to work at the right time. So it used to be that the employee didn't always have to work with us, or we didn't always have to work with the employee, but now it's set up so that both work together to enter into a plan, that a return to work plan that will actually help the individual come back to work sooner. And why is that important? It's proven statistically over and over that the person will typically heal faster and they are going to come back to work sooner. It's really important that you want them back as soon as possible and or that they have no lost time, because emotions come into play for individuals. And statistics also show that that means prolonged healing. It means more stress for them to come back to work because there are new employees, or there's new conditions, or there's a new project, or these things that they feel a fear to come back, or that they feel that they're not sure, and they lose some confidence. So these are things that are proven why to do your best to accommodate and work with your team member. And for the employer, you're able to have someone come in to do the work, and then maybe that's part of billable time or helps in your profit part. And also the most important part is that you're helping that employee heal and come back to the best pre-injury state possible. Moving up on the 1, 2, 3, 4, basically number 1 is get medical help, 2 is document. That's really important. And then 3, report to WSIB. And this is for 3 different timelines. 1, if there's time off from work, if there's lost wages from work, and if medical care is sought. So if someone goes to the doctor or anything like that, or of course 911 is called, automatically you complete the proper forms for WSIB and send that in. Otherwise, all injuries and all incidences are just documented. It's so important to know that. Return to work, as we continue through that mandate. So WSIB mandates that employers engage in that program together. And it's important for safe and early return to work as a review. And considerations will be workplace injury illness, what type of workplace injury illness it is. You want to be agreeable to the suitable duties that meet special accommodations outlined in the employee's physician or outlined by the employee's physician and or healthcare provider. And then they will prepare what I had mentioned earlier, which is an FAF or a functional ability report or form that outlines all of the accommodations that you would need to think about. And when we speak to accommodations, that might be less time worked, so a lesser day, maybe more breaks. It could be that the individual may not be able to lift very much, not to compare to what their job is. But then what happens is that as they continue to heal, you'll get new FAFs when you request them. And those FAFs are to hopefully show progress so that employee is able to lift more, work longer, whatever it is that the accommodations were needed for as they expand back to the regular work week. So that's the whole idea around the FAF, and it gives good documentation for you to have on file as well. And then basically, if you have a safety representative or a designated leader that's following up on that, that they would look after that. Otherwise, it's in the employer's hands to make sure that they look after it. They don't allow us to say, we don't know anymore, and or, oh, I wasn't aware of that, or anything like that. It's our job as an employer is to seek the information, to find out the information, to ask the questions, to do what you're doing today by attending a session where it may provide more information or give you some updates to where you're sitting, or confirmation. Okay, great, we're doing the right thing and we're right on track. We're going to get into terminations, and anyone in HR says that we want to be liked, and we're not often liked in HR. And that's because typically we're dealing with the difficult situations. And one of those is termination. So again, some of you will not have HR. Some of you might just seek an outsource HR. Some of you will be looking to do this for yourselves. So having this information on a few do's and don'ts is really important. And the basic choice is, do you want this to be a sunny situation or a turbulent one? So this is Really, really important to consider. And I'm sure most of you are going to take the sunny route, because the other one never really leads to a positive outcome. And it's just so stressful. So termination dues: be prepared, lead by example, and encourage open lines of appropriate communication. And when we're speaking appropriate communication, we're speaking about positive, we're speaking about clear. If you have issues or concerns, address them. Don't mask them, don't sugarcoat them, address them effectively and properly in the right manner, not in front of people. Pull people aside and give them opportunity to explain. These types of things are really, really important, not to have a difficult discussion with a team member around other people. Be fair when you're assessing and try to keep your emotions in check. And this can be really difficult for employers because we've invested. We're stressed because we may have more work than we initially planned by hiring, or this individual has just taken so much off our plate that we're enjoying this piece and you don't want anything to happen. There's many, many scenarios. They're all different, but very important to keep your emotions in check when you're going through this process, and make sure you document. So any meetings or conversations, document them. Correct and support as required. So correct and support issues. Correct issues and support the team member or employee with more training, with more guidance. Maybe they need to know more about what they're doing right. Maybe it's a confidence thing for them. So really try your best to understand more about the team member as much as you can and provide the support. If you're not sure what the support is, ask them. Ask them, what is it that you think you need to feel supported and to be successful in this role? And they'll often give you some pointers. So it may be something you thought of and that you planned for, and it may be something completely different that's very doable. You just didn't know. So very important to look for that. And then it goes right up to from a conversation and documentation to what's called a PIP, or a performance improvement plan. And those are usually situations for or put in play for situations that are more complex. They've gone through progressive discipline processes, which is the 1, 2, 3 process. And you're still not seeing improvement. They're past and beyond their probation period. All of these things have already occurred, and or the performance has really changed from good and great to poor and challenging. And you've done your best to go through the steps and so on. As we discuss here, you've checked your boxes on your employment agreement, the job description, the training, all of those things, and it's still not happening, then a PIP is often put in place. So that's developed with measurables to help the individual improve their performance. Reassess and learn from mistakes or HR issues. You will have them. We're people. None of us are perfect. There is no perfect situation. But what we're trying to do is make it as close to as we can by being prepared and by understanding and pulling our knowledge together. I know it's really important for us to continually update our information. I always have a coach in all aspects of the business. I'm always updating and educating myself, because that's what we do to be able to support our clients. It's really, really important. So when we experience a mistake or an issue, or something happens with our clients that they've made that we're helping them through, it's really important to be able to add that information we learned from that, and not to share anything confidential, as we never would. But if we see a client perhaps coming into that situation, we will actually caution them to say, be careful of this, because sometimes situations come up that you would never dream would come up. So basically, again, learn from your mistakes and move on. We will make them. Make sure that you learn from them, because if you don't learn from them, you're going to repeat them again. And that tends to be very costly. And again, time can be time consuming, and it can be stressful. So do your best to learn and make the adjustments that you need. Maybe it's on a job description, maybe it's in the employment agreement, maybe it's in your training process, maybe it's in communication. Identify it, figure it out, and make sure that you move through that. So we're all here to learn and grow. Check regulations and make timely, sound decisions. So check regulations whenever you're going through a process. So if you don't have anyone to help, often people start out, they just don't have the funding or the resources, or they're just not there yet, or even wish to, perhaps. So it's important to check the regulations. So make sure you're checking all regulations, which we spoke about before, which was employment standards, human resource, or sorry, human rights, making sure that you're looking at CRA standards, that you're looking at WSIB standards, and you're looking at MLI TSD standards. They are there. We have a lot of compliance, and the challenge is that there's not really a list to say, what exactly do we need to be compliant to? And some of the reasons for that is that every business is a bit different. And so you need to look at those different areas and identify where you fit in and what would be required. So if it's mandatory and must, you need to do that. If it's suggested or good practices, then that's something that you would implement if it suited your business and your business met those requirements to do that. Check regulations, again, timely decisions. When it's time to make a decision to move someone from HR into a promotion or to move through growth, make that decision and make it happen as quickly as you possibly can, the correct way. Again, by making those adjustments to the job descriptions that are affected. If you have to review and have a new employment agreement in place, whatever that is, make sure that you make those adjustments and get those done in a timely manner and keep communicating with your employee about it so they know where they stand. If it's to terminate an employee, which is really what we're speaking to here, make the decision and take action. The longer it's left, the harder it is for you, the harder it is on HR if they're supporting you, because typically more things happen, more emotions come into play, so and heightened stress and concerns. And if you've decided to terminate, the emotional decision has been made, even though you need to make the connection and take action with the right regulation and steps in play that are available to us through employment standards and other means. Workplace prevention. So important to look at workplace prevention measures to prevent terminations from occurring wherever you can. So again, having these things that we're discussing today in play and reviewing and updating, all of those things are part of prevention. Just like you hear prevention measures for safety, we have prevention measures for HR as well. Take appropriate action according to regulations and the situation. So the situation may be that the person's in their 3-month probation. You can terminate an employee in the first 3 months of their probation without notice, without a reason. It's like the getting to know you period. And they can also leave with the same thing. Maybe it's not for them as well. Once you reach 3 months and 1 day, that probation period has ended. And then you look at 1 month, or sorry, that 3-month, 1 day to 1 year, then 1 year to 2, 2 to 3, and so on, right up to those employees that may be employed for many years. And there are rules and regulations around what's required for termination severance, the process, and so on. Make sure that you seek professional advice and guidance from your HR department and or through an HR professional or legal department. And that's to consider full and final releases. So this is a lot of work that we do, again, in HR, is that we make sure that we guide and or we recommend that employees obviously follow regulations, employment standards, and the terms of whether you provide notice or pay in lieu of notice to terminate an employee. And you also need to consider other things like what would the employee perhaps be entitled to through common law, through human rights. And you consider those things, as well as look at a nominal amount of money that would be put into a full and final release document. So what happens there, and again, we'll have time to go into all of that today, but what happens in summary is that you provide the employee with what's required under employment standards for the termination. Then you look to a full and final release, which outlines what you're going to provide to them for them to sign off that they would never come back again in suit. They couldn't come back to the employer on any concerns. Again, if you're doing things right and you're prepared, even if an employee does, you're typically going to be in good shape. But considering a full and final release, even if it's an extra week of termination pay and something else that you want to add in there, or extension of benefits for maybe a few weeks, whatever that might be that's put together in that is something to really consider as for them to sign off that they would not come back again in the future. And again, please don't be fearful. I know some of the HR can be really legal driven, which is part of it. It can be very challenging sometimes to think, oh my gosh, I don't know if I want to hire anyone. And I get that. But really, really important that you just realize that it's like planning and preparing for your business development and growth, planning and preparing for your day, planning and preparing to meet the township regulations in your storefront. It's the same type of thing. It's just on the HR side. So some of the don'ts is make assumptions that you understood. So make sure that when you're, and we understood what the problems are, what the concerns are from the other team members about an employee, what the employee's concerns are, and make sure that you're looking at different forms of communication to make sure you understand. Again, sometimes it can be a situation where you would say, I would reach out, okay, Sam, as my employee, I have concerns about your performance in specific area ABC. And then I would follow up with an email to say that we had conversation about it so that they would be meeting the different forms of communication. And or I may ask them in a meeting to repeat back to me what they understood I said. And again, in a very professional way, but to make sure that they do understand, because again, sometimes in these situations, especially when you're leading to termination or there's issues or concerns or the whys about it, people are really not hearing it sometimes. They're really not hearing the questions because they're stressed about it. And again, if they're not stressed about it or concerned, then and they're more like, well, whatever, well, then that's a whole different situation. But again, really doing your best to communicate and that at the same time you're documenting. Do not be alone with an employee when you're addressing sensitive matters or you're going through a termination. It is very important to have someone with you that will take notes, someone that'll be there just to support, so that if an employee ever came back to say that something happened or that you yelled at them or anything like that, you have another person that is there to witness to say that did not happen. And making sure that that you are professional through that process. So again, I always say that it's really important once you start to have heightened conversation, once you start to have challenges and where there's a lot of argument and confrontation, nobody wins those situations, and particularly employers. And very important that you're really cautious and you're really careful with that. So if you cannot be alone, if you have no one to help you and you have to be alone, it's important to let the individual know that you're going to record the meeting. So recording it, and for documentation for noting later, you can do that. It's just important that you would let them know, and I have them sign off that they are aware that it's being recorded for the purposes of referring back to the meeting, and so that they are aware. Make sure you put yourself in a position that you do not put yourself in a position that could raise issues of workplace violence, harassment, or sexual harassment. So in these types of situations, sometimes, and again, not being alone with somebody is important to mitigate these issues. Having things recorded, again, will give you some support in this particular area. But sometimes employees misunderstand that and think you're harassing them when you're reprimanding them or when you're terminating them. Now, some people do. They yell at people, they're very aggressive, they're very assertive with their body language, and that is not appropriate as an employer at any time. However, many don't. They're not liking doing this. They don't want to do this. It's, maybe they like the person and they find that they're great, but they have to terminate them because it's just not working out as far as an employee-employer relationship. So very important to make sure that you don't put yourself in a position where you could be cited for any of these, because as a provider doing third-party workplace investigations, it's a big deal. And it is to go through the process to determine whether it was founded or unfounded. So for the employer, it is a cost to do that. And it requires a huge component on our part as HR performing these third-party investigations. Again, some can be done internally, some are required by a third-party investigator. And then from that investigation, you determine whether they were founded. You determine whether that, once it's found, what are recommendations. And sometimes the recommendations can be further training, a note to apologize, maybe suspension, maybe it's termination. So that's why we bring it up here. So again, depending again on each and every single situation, making sure you're mitigating risk and liability and also being clear for your team, which again is a good mutual collaborative, happy arrangement. Again, do not do anything when there are performance or behavioral questions. So when you have issues with your employee, not to do something is the worst thing. It's just like the worst communication is no communication. So when you have issues, it is really important to address them early on before they build or before it affects other team members or before it affects you or the company or your clients or customers. So when you see that happening, making sure that you do address them. And sometimes the challenges that we sometimes find is that when we're called into support, it's already gone so far that it could have been dealt with earlier and maybe the relationship would have continued to be a positive one for longer term. And or there's been so much that's stirred up and has been internal because of that it's created some scars and some little wounds in the company or the team that need to be addressed and mended and healed as you go forward. Know the difference between cause and not for cause when you're terminating. And what I can say from experience and staying within our lane as HR specialists and safety specialists is that we stay in our HR lane and then we work with legal as needed, because that crossing over is not okay. Again, for you as an employer, you may go to HR if you're not sure and you're comfortable, or you may go to legal. A good HR provider will let you know if they can help you from within their realm or that you should go directly to legal, because it's very important for HR professionals to stay in our lane of expertise and professionalism and experience. So back to the cause and not for cause. If you don't have documentation, you don't have cause. And again, when I say that, if somebody is stealing and somebody has been caught and all of these types of things, that first time and it was a really huge issue, someone was injured or those things, you may have cause if you've put it in your employment agreement what cause could mean. Theft, harming another individual, all these types of things if it's noted in there. But otherwise, if you don't have documentation, you've not offered opportunity for the employee to improve, you've not done any of those things, then the chances of you having for cause, which means that you can terminate them without pay or notice and or any other payment, is quite unlikely. And again, that's from our experience. Not for cause is when it's just not working out, or you've decided that maybe you need to move on. It's just that employee is just not moving forward with you, or vice versa, and you need to part ways. So that is where you would pay the employment standards amount for termination pay. And again, consider doing a full and final release if that's something that you wanted to consider at that point, just to be ahead of things and for planning and to mitigate some of the chances of somebody coming back, trying to sue you or things like that. Again, it happens more, I think, than it's ever happened before. Our experience, though, is that if you have everything in play that you should have in play, or you're everything reasonable, you're typically in a really good position. And then going through the process, especially if you're offering what's fair, what's in compliance and regulation, as opposed to trying not to offer anything or not to do what's required. That's where people, employers, of course, we're all people, employers that put themselves in the position to open up for suit and liability and have quite an expense to work through that. So what I'd like you to do is being prepared for employment and or for the next individual coming on board is to take some time to list your non-negotiable expectations. So this relates to employment agreements and job descriptions. What are things that you will not budge on, that you will not negotiate on? And I'd like you to just make a note to note those. If you have time now to jot those down as you're listening to our presentation, super. If not, make a note. And it's a really important exercise because you will use this to adjust your job descriptions that you have now or employment agreements or build your new ones. depending on the situation that you're in and where you are with your status in your company for hiring. So again, list your non-negotiables and expectations. So there's certain things that when you're employing somebody that you just cannot budge on. And what you'll find is that as employers, we'll have some things that are common, but we'll also have things that are different. And again, looking at that would address things like, and I'll just give you an example. One of my non-negotiables is respect. I give it and I expect it. Something else is honesty for me. So again, I'll put some few of the things for me and for me that I've listed coming forward, and I'll give you some of mine, but just as an example, what will you not budge on? You need that team member to be these specific things in order for us to even move through what the skills of the job are. Would you like a 3-minute? I'm not sure, Celeste, if you can comment to that, but if you'd like 3 to 5 minutes, we can stop for that now for you to refresh, pop to the washroom, or just do a little bit of a stretch and break. And then we're going to get into employment agreements, job descriptions, and some other key important information to be completed by 2:30.
In the chat, we have a request for a quick break.
We're all back and you. Okay, everybody, I hope you're back and feeling a little refreshed as we move through to the next stages. Again, thank you for your attention. I know it's a lot of information, but we all have to start and grow in specific sessions that will actually give us the information that we need to move through and grow. So key components of an employment agreement include these particular headings. So again, when we provide the slide deck to Celeste, you'll have these noted. So you can certainly take notes if you wish, but if not, we'll make sure that it's provided over the next couple of days to be sent out to you. But basically at the top of the document, like any type of legal document or agreement, you're going to have the full company name and the employees' names and the job titles or roles. So job role. And then when I added role would be like the title of the role and or the role or the basic description of the role. If there's no real title to it, then you would put what the role is. Governing bodies that your company follows. So that would be typically, unless you're exempt, would be employment standards, CRA, Minister of Labor, WSIB, human rights, common law. So those would be the particular areas that you would typically note. Outline your non-negotiables. Again, hopefully you've made a note to develop your non-negotiables, and what they become is part of your decision-making process as you move through. Do you look to promote someone, or do you look to, unfortunately, need to terminate an individual? And what we do on our performance reviews that we develop for companies is that we list the non-negotiables at the top of the performance review. And if the employees don't meet that, then the question is, what are we doing? And so then you're asking that question. Is there something that they meet almost all of them, and there's a couple of key ones that we just need to support them with help? Terrific. But if those are not being met, it's likely that the relationship isn't going to work out or isn't working out. So then we move through the process. Anyways, back to the employment agreement, and the key components is to make sure that you do outline your non-negotiables. Make sure that you outline professional conduct and behavior, communication, confidential expectations, and include things like showing up to work. And if someone doesn't show up in a number of days, so typically we note if someone is not showing up on the second day or third time that has occurred, then we've put job abandonment. So there's things that you can do, because sometimes you just don't know when people are showing up. Are they coming back? You've worked through hiring them and maybe they're doing a great job, but the lack of communication has occurred. And again, these are things we hear about all the time and that have been real concerns over the last few years. So this is why we add this into the employment agreement. So be clear about it. What's going to happen? Make sure that you can also, for some of these, you can attach, so you can address these as a heading and then put attach schedule to or refer to company policy for some of these things that are important, like professional conduct and behavior, communication, those types of things. We often put them right in the employment agreement, because that employment agreement is for the new recruits, or if you've developed a new one, You implement that with all of your staff, but no matter how long they've worked with you. And then you use that employment agreement to make offers of an offer of employment, which once signed by the employee and the employer becomes the agreement. And the overall employment agreement should be the very same for everyone. The only differences that you'll find will be salary, maybe some of the benefits, and so on, perks of the job. And I'll just use as an example as we get here into compensation and pay is that maybe there's a vehicle allowed, maybe there's a fuel allowance for because of the role of what that individual needs to do to meet. So there's particular areas that will be in there. That's really important. So again, the headings and then noting where they're found or putting it right into the agreement is typically what we do. What we also do is make sure that we note that we follow employment standards. So it's better not to list what's in employment standards right now, because if employment standards change, you're still going to have to go by employment standards at the time that the situation occurs, whether that's what to do in moving through a situation, or if it's a termination or something like that, you're still going to need to follow the present day employment standards. So to not have to keep refreshing and reviewing your employment agreement, it's important to note things like that, as opposed to, well, we're going to go through employment standards, we're going to copy that in, and we're going to put that into our employment agreement. We would highly suggest that you not do that. The other component would be, again, making sure that compensation and pay, so pay periods, so in your employment agreement is how you compensate and how you pay and when you pay. So it would be hourly wage or salary, hours of work, overtime, tracking time and submitting for payroll processing, typical work schedule and breaks. And the reason we say typical is that we always want to say that there will be times where the schedule may change with proper notice. Now, proper notice is as much as you have. If you knew 3 weeks before that the schedule may change, give as much notice as you can. But proper notice typically goes by how you pay. So if you pay by the week, then a week's notice. If you pay bi-weekly, then 2 weeks notice. That would be called typical. Or reasonable notice as far as timing. But if you can let people know ahead of time so they can be prepared, whether that's childcare or travel arrangements or things like that, then it's just, again, having those good communication, opportunities for good communication and building those trusted relationships. Making sure that you put any other allowances, fuel allowances, company vehicles, personal use of tools. So if it's a trade, making sure if they're using any of their own personal tools, how that looks, and then what would be utilized by the employee as far as company tools. Or you may say, this is a list of all personal tools required that you bring yours to the job, and then the other tools and equipment. Again, that could be maybe they're required to have specific hand tools, maybe it's other pneumatic tools, but it could also be, if you look on the other side, not trades, but someone in particular service or office, maybe they're required to have their own laptop. And maybe that's a requirement of the job that you've put in your job ad and so on. And then you have specific security measures in play. If something doesn't work out, that you're able to obtain your information and have that back and so on. So again, all the specifics, depending on your situation, will be outlined within your employment agreement. Make sure that you also note vacation and stat pay, as well as the performance period and reviews. Qualifications, so heading for qualifications. So outline the employee's certifications, confirmation of previous training and accreditation. So what you would ask for in the job ad for what you've outlined is required to successfully to be recruited and to come on board with your company. Make sure that you note that, and that employee is to maintain that. And then you would note that if there's a fee to maintain that, or time off, or whatever is required, depending on the job that they hold and the role that they hold, that you're addressing that right up front in the employment agreement. And then make sure that you outline mandatory training, mandatory attendance for all of your compliance training, whether that's human resources, skills training for what you do in your production or for your work, and also making sure that they attend for safety training. Very important. So unless they are ill or they cannot come for some kind of very, very important reason, they must attend mandatory training because you are mandatorily required to provide it. And the other part of mandatory training is that you are also required as an employer to pay for it. So that is time paid for mandatory training. Make sure that you outline attire and dress, making sure that people understand what is appropriate, whether that's casual dress, whether that's wearing promotional wear, whether it's uniform, making sure that you include that, as well as a list of the personal protective equipment that's required that would go into the job description. So employers are not required to provide all PPE, personal protective equipment. They're required to provide a list for employees of what they need to wear on their body as basics. Then when it comes to specialized equipment, say for in construction, working at heights gear, or perhaps in construction or other environments, a respirator or anything that's unique, fire rated clothing, that type of thing, that would be the employer's responsibility to provide it to the employee. So if you do in your organization or want to provide certain PPE, like say, for instance, you're providing gloves, which will be considered a basic PPE. You're going to supply gloves and safety glasses as an example, then the employee would typically provide themselves from your list. If you want to do that, then note that it's important that they take care of that because you are providing it. And so that they do take care of it and that it's not going to be misused. And again, we find most people are great. It's the challenges that you face that affect the environment and or specific relationships. But addressing it up front, as I initially started with, whether that's family, friends, whether that's a new hire, all of this is really, really important to maintaining the relationship. And those non-negotiables are critical in the relationship, just like they are for your friends, for your maybe perhaps your other professional colleagues, for any kind of strategic partners. There's certain things that we all require, and it's absolutely paramount to know what they are when you are an employer and to have that ready when you're developing your policies and procedures, your performance reviews, and so on. Make sure that you have reference to company policies, procedures, and sometimes they're called PPPs. So policies, procedures, or policy, procedures, and protocols, depending on the term, but really procedures and protocols are the same. Termination as per ESA, so lay it out that you would termination and pay accordingly would be outlined by employment standards, which would be the standards at that time. The entire agreement. So the entire agreement is a legal entity about the entire agreement and severability, and they address that if there was a change or say regulation did change and your employment agreement was old or down the road, that if a part of that was not enforceable, that the rest of the employment agreement would be valid. Basically, provide a timeline for employees to seek advice, sign, and date and return. There is no timeline requirement set. However, we typically give 2 to 3 days or 1 week, depending on the role, depending on the situation, but typically never under 2 days. And that means that you're reviewing everything, the employment agreement, you've provided it to a new recruit to review, which is the offer, and they should have the opportunity to seek advice, whether that's read it themselves, seek advice from family, or whether that's to seek legal advice before they sign it. Fresh consideration would be for employers that don't have an employment agreement in place, but know the importance of doing this going forward. So this is where you would develop an employment agreement that would be the same as we mentioned before for all employees moving forward, and they would have fresh consideration, which is an amount paid once the employee signs the new agreement. So that can be a nominal fee, but just to bind the new relationship when there hasn't been an employment agreement, that is required. Also, anything other things to note is that areas where you have the freedom at management's discretion, or from time to time, meaning in a job description, from time to time will have duties other than what's outlined in the job description. Onboarding checklist. So we're just working through this so that we have this. We are actually right at 2:30, so we want to finish the last slides. is making sure that you sign off through due diligence as you go through the checklist when you're hiring someone. So work schedule and expectations. And again, this is part from showing up and being ready to work to the duties. PPE that the employee is required to have and wear, and what you'll be providing for them when you're reviewing this while you're onboarding. List and scheduling, training, what's required upon hire right away, and what would be throughout and during the onboarding process, which could be 3 to 6 months or more. But again, usually looking at the probation period for your onboarding. Introduction to the team while touring your workplace. Show where to find information like safety, HR and safety information, if it's in a poster, a binder, or a board. Emergency protocols, including your meeting, assembly, or muster point, which is all one thing, which is where do you go if there's an emergency that happens in the workplace or on your job site? Then where do people go and meet so that you know that everyone's been accounted for? And then again, making sure you're following 911 protocols. Contact information for the employee's direct report, HR, supervisor, safety rep, and employers required. Under the section, Occupational Health and Safety Act, Section 25, 2 points here that are important, just so that you are aware of just where this information comes from and this governing bodies, is that every employer shall provide information, instruction, and supervision to protect the health and safety of a worker, and prepare and review at least annually a written occupational health and safety policy, which is in statement, and develop and maintain a program to implement the policy. So it is mandated, and that's where some of HR and safety again tied together. Workplace policies, make sure that there's a due diligence sign off for this. Assessing the risks in your workplace. Ask yourself if this policy and policy statements required, or is there a purpose for the policy? Who does the policy relate to in the workplace, meaning who's responsible for following it? Meet training and required compliance, including prevention of workplace violence and harassment and sexual harassment. Write proper and clear policies and procedures. And to the level of comprehension for the role, the team, and the company. If you don't know, or it's in general, or there's a variety, then it's always recommended to write policies and procedures at a grade 8 level. HR payroll forms and requests, including onset, annually, and as updated, like TD1s, vacation and time off requests or tracking timesheets. And again, at management's discretion is really good because it's important both sides. At management's discretion, you can make decisions and determine what may be required from time to time. And roles from time to time may change. It's very hard to list every single thing into a job description, but you're trying to cover as much as possible. This is a poster that, if any, will provide this information that we've developed as a company for the prevention of violence and harassment in the workplace and how to report it. And then just to share some of my non-negotiables, I mentioned to you earlier that respect is one. So respect, honesty, open lines of communication, showing up for work, learning by mistakes, making sure that you are a good communicator with respect to others in the workplace, and making sure that you are upfront about things. So these are just some of the non-negotiables that we have. Some other non-negotiables are areas of specific skill set. So maybe office-related skill set with respect to what's required. So you're going to find mostly your non-negotiables will cross over with some other employers, but we find every employer has different non-negotiables. If those aren't met, then you know that it's probably not going to work out, or what do you need to do to meet those? And that's where you look to do that. So I thank you for today. Very grateful. And I'm certainly put the information here. So if you wish to reach out with a question, we are very open to that. We're very professional, and hopefully you feel that from today, but also approachable. And we are not afraid to ask, and very helpful to those that have questions. And again, not afraid to say, this is beyond our scope as HR professionals. This will be something that you should seek legal advice on. And to leave this going forward is most successful businesses and entrepreneurs and their teams, they're not formed from the same cookie dough. We're not all cookie cutter businesses. There are certain specific things that we've covered today to consider. There are certain things that are mandatory, and it's important to be informed and before you move forward and be prepared. Again, thank you very much for attending, and all the best of luck with your hiring and growth and development.